Good morning. It is Tuesday, about 9 a.m., and this is my last full day in San Francisco. It's been a great experience so far. I've been able to see a lot of the city. Hopefully you've enjoyed some of the things that I've shown you so far. Today, for me, is the day I've been waiting for the most. Today I go to visit Alcatraz Island. Steeped in history, so many movies and shows based from Alcatraz, and being kind of a history nerd, I'm really excited to go and visit today. So I've got a ferry crossing booked for 11 a.m., so about 2 hours from now. So I'm going to get some breakfast and some coffee, and then we're going to head down to Pier 33, where the ferry departs from. I don't know how long I can stay on the island for. I'm assuming until I'm ready to come back. Same day, of course, but so let's get going. So we've arrived down here near the wharf at Pier 33, which is where we catch the ferry over to Alcatraz. It's a nice ride up there on the streetcar. One of the historical streetcars that they still have in operation here, the F line, which is still part of the San Francisco transportation system, and still works with the Mooney Pass as well. So surprise, surprise, this place is crazy. Let's go over here and look at the model. What is this? A prison for ants? Well, I booked for the 11 a.m. ferry and I'm on the 10:35 ferry, so I guess that means extra time for me.
Los Angeles. Actually, I hitchhiked up here, and I hitchhiked back down to Los Angeles and got my family and moved up here within the week.
But the media does want a hero, and Richard fulfilled the role. I mean, he was a good-looking man, he was articulate.
He had a lot of ideas, but everyone had ideas, but he had a lot of guts. He would act on them. He was a confrontational kind of guy. He would get up and the face of authorities and college presidents and stuff, so that's how he emerged as a leader.
And we went ahead and selected Richard Oakes to represent us. As a president already selected him.
I heard from the Department of Interior. Probably like where they kept like storage area.
So the construction of Alcatraz began before the Civil War and was completed in the 1850s. It initially was used as a military outpost, heavily fortified, and afterwards was then converted into the prison. In its 1969 to 1971, there was an indigenous effort to occupy the island as a form of protest, as these lands were originally indigenous before they were taken over by the British. Building 64, which was a penitentiary apartment house from 1934 to 1963. Prior to that was the guard barracks. The water tower behind me is another sign of the Indian occupation here from 1969 to 1971, where they scaled to the top and created signs of protest. This is the original morgue that was built in 1910. To house bodies. It wasn't possible to bury anybody on the island due to it being a giant rock. So this is where the bodies were stored until they could be moved to either Angel Island or another location. Kind of like that the latest occupation is seagulls. And here we are now making our way up to the main prison. The intake area where the prisoners would grab their famous Alcatraz blues and shoes and basic necessities. And if you were in Alcatraz, you certainly couldn't be modest in the showers. So this is actually an audio tour. I've got a headset with me, a little setup. So I'll try and narrate as I go. Welcome to the tour of the Alcatraz cell house. This tour was narrated by 4 former correctional officers and 4 former inmates as well. The tour is primarily narrated by Pat Mahoney, who was a correctional officer at Alcatraz for 7 years, and he is joined by Philip Bergen, George De Vicenzi, and Ron Battles. On top of that, you also have some information provided by Leon Whitey Thompson, who is inmate 1465, John Banner, inmate 1133, who was number 17 on the FBI's most wanted list. Jim Quillen, who was inmate number 586. And Darwin Kuhn, who was inmate 1422. And through this first section, we see some of the standard size cells that were part of the main cell block at Alcatraz. The cells were roughly 5 feet wide by 9 feet deep and 7 feet high. And they came very standard, very plain, with just the bunk, a metal shelf, the toilet and sink that you see at the backside, and a shelf above that. This next section was known as the cutoff, which was a means from getting from one row of cells to the next. Through this section, the narrators talked about a bit of the history of the island, where it was first discovered back in 1775 and was named Isla de los Alcatrazes, or Isle of the Pelicans. In 1849, it was then sold to the U.S. government and was the site of the first lighthouse in California in 1854. The first permanent Army detachment was garrisoned there in 1859, and 1861 was designated a residence for military offenders. In 1907, the island was then designated the Pacific branch of the United States military prison, and, of course, most famously, from 1934 to 1963, it served as the federal prison for some of the most dangerous civilian prisoners in the country. We then turn on to Broadway, which was the first stop for most new prisoners. Prisoners were brought in through this area when they first arrived, often in their birthday suits, in front of all the other prisoners. So in these next 3 cells, we were shown examples of standard setups for new inmates. Cell 113 showed you what they received when they first arrived, which was often a rolled up mattress on the bed, some towels and soap up on the shelf, and a copy of the rules of the jail cells. The official rules and regulations that were provided were expected to be adhered to at all times. Failure to do so often ended up in prisoners going off into isolation. One of the things that the inmates were always guaranteed was a fresh pack of cigarettes, 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And these were handed out to all inmates, whether they smoked or not. This next intersection was known as Times Square. You'll see the clock up on the wall there in front. This is the area where many inmates would gather on their way into the cafeteria for meals every day, and for general population to move back and forth between their cells. This next clip is a short presentation that was going on about Al Capone at Alcatraz.
Pennsylvania. But when you look at this picture of the cell, you can see that the cell is carpeted, it's got a couple of lamps in it, and it's even got a desk in it. I mean, his cell looks more like a university or a college dormitory room than a prison cell. And that's the mindset he shows up with at the Atlanta Penitentiary. As I said, over time, rumors of Capone getting special treatment start to float up to the Bureau of Prisons headquarters in Washington, D.C.
The next section of the tour was a brief discussion about the prison yard. The prison yard was a privilege that was provided to prisoners at Alcatraz if they were behaving and following the rules. When outside in the yard, prisoners would play bridge, play baseball, or other activities. And we'll come back to the prison recreation yard for another look later on in this video. Prisoners who didn't behave during their time at Alcatraz were then sent to this next section of the tour, D Block. So this next section, D Block, was known as the prison within the prison. It was officially termed the treatment unit, but was really just the isolation ward. When inmates were sent to isolation, they were in these cells 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The one exception was that they were left out for 1 hour a week for a shower and some exercise.
Many of the most famous inmates at Alcatraz spent time in D Block. Some of those that spent time in isolation included Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, Creepy Karpus, and one of the other most famous was Robert Stroud, also known as the Birdman of Alcatraz. Robert Stroud was in prison from 1909 until 1963 and spent a number of years at Alcatraz, all of which were in the D Block. Within D Block, there were 6 closed front cells that were used for the worst offenders, amongst the worst offenders in D Block. These cells, known as the Hole, sometimes included total darkness for 24 hours a day and a very restricted diet. Inmates who spent time in the Hole usually lasted several days. Let's take a walk inside one and see what it feels like. Very few inmates ever saw inside of the Hole. This next section was the prison library. Prisoners with privileges could access the library and many of the different resources within it. This would include being able to order magazine subscriptions, read books, and even take correspondence courses from colleges on the outside. Passing the time in Alcatraz meant long days in many cases. In the 1950s, radios were installed in Alcatraz in the cells. Inmates had 2 stations to choose from on the radio and would connect a set of headphones that were provided. Beyond that, musical instruments were apparently fairly common. Instruments like the harmonica and the accordion. We then had a brief look at the visitation windows, which were 4 small bulletproof windows to which privileged prisoners could speak to the outside world. June 1962 saw the most famous attempt at escape from Alcatraz. 4 inmates in total, Frank Morris, brothers John and Clarence Anglin, and Alan West attempted to escape Alcatraz. The 4th man, Alan West, never made it out of his cell, but the other 3 managed to successfully carve holes through the back of their cell using metal spoons that they acquired from the cafeteria. They then used paper mache heads that they had assembled using their own likenesses and tucked those into the bed. They then climbed through the holes and up through the unguarded ventilation ducts. In that top level, they actually built a raft out of a variety of things, including raincoats and other materials. They constructed life preservers based on a design that they found in a Popular Mechanics magazine from 1962. Ultimately, the 3 men who escaped were never seen again. The speculation is that they drowned in the waters off of Alcatraz. However, the mystery around their disappearance has fascinated people for decades, many people believing that they managed to successfully escape and that they ended up living out their lives on the mainland in the US. The final stop on the tour was the dining hall, where 3 times a day all men in the prison came here for 20-minute meals at the same time. As a result, this was considered one of the most dangerous areas of the entire prison, as everyone had access to forks and knives and spoons during this time. You may notice here on the side of the kitchen that the outline of the knives that were used in the kitchen were painted in black, so that if any knives were to disappear, it would be immediately recognizable that something was missing. The dining hall was also known as the gas chamber to the inmates. At the tops of the walls, there were canisters installed that included tear gas, so that if any riots or fights were to break out, the tear gas could be deployed.
So I'm sitting here in the dining hall at Alcatraz, and it's really interesting to learn that in 1963, when this place was closed for good, it was actually Robert F. Kennedy who made the decision to close the island prison due to deterioration from weather and the wind and that type of stuff. It was just too expensive to maintain the prison any further, so that was why it was closed in 1963. If you're going to come and do one thing in San Francisco, make sure you come to Alcatraz. This place is fantastic. So much history, so well maintained. There's no other place like it. It's just such a unique location to come and visit. This entire island prison that was used for decades. The audio tour inside the main prison cell is fantastic. It's presented by former inmates and guards and walks you through the entire main building, talking about all the history and some of the facts involved as well. So definitely check that out. Make our way over here now to the lighthouse on the other side of the prison block. So we're just outside the administration building here, and this is the lighthouse that's perched atop Alcatraz Island. This was not the original, which was built in 1854, but a much larger one that was built later on. Here is the remnants of the old warden's house. You can see there's not a lot left other than the old fireplace inside. So this old warden's house was built in 1921 when this mansion was completed, and in 1970 it caught fire and burned, which is why it's in the current state that it's in today. So down there you can see what are the remnants of staff housing. So this is actually where anybody who worked on the prison, both the staff and staff's family members lived here. So this was you know, recreational area for kids. Every day the kids would get on a boat and go across the harbor over to San Francisco for school and then return at the end of the day. As you can see now though, there's nothing left down there. I'm gonna take a walk over here now towards the administration building. So this control room is where the operators would have controlled the cell block doors and general control of the prisoners throughout Alcatraz. So this is the visitor side of the visitation area, where once a month prisoners would be allowed to have a visitor, and the only way to talk was through a telephone hooked up through this bulletproof glass window. Here's some more of the leftover staff homes. I'm not sure what the story is here, if they collapsed in an earthquake or just fallen into disrepair, but you can see there's a piece of a wall there and a full home there, obviously, at one point. All long gone now. You really get the sense standing here as well that, you know, you look how close you are to San Francisco and freedom, I guess. But yeah, you would never get across there. It's just too windy, too cold, too wavy, you know, to ever get away from this place. Just gonna head down the hill here and go for a little walk and see where we get to. So the homes that were down there were demolished about a decade after the prison closure in 1963. And you can see the large number of cormorants and seagulls that hang out here, like this guy. And then hundreds of black cormorants down below. This backside of Alcatraz is certainly something. It's quite the drop off from the side of the building. Looks to be at least 50 feet, I would say, straight down off the side. So even if you've managed to somehow get to the outside of the building, there was really wasn't anywhere to go. Down through the gardens here. This is actually around the area where the first prison escape attempt was done in 1936. I'm actually surprised by the amount of gardens that are here. It's like half the island has been taken over by a wonderful garden of all kinds of different things to see here. And looks like there's quite the history behind it as well.
Said it was cold. Why didn't lead us here? I was like, I said.
Walked up a set of stairs from the gardens and ended up back in the recreation yard. Which means I'll have to go through the prison again, I guess. Oh well. So I'm just making my way back down, and I stopped here for a moment. You can see these gardens that are here. This is where the original homes for Officers Row used to exist. So the officers' families would live here. After these were torn down in the 40s, then prisoners turned this into a garden, where the foundation of the house still remains. So this is the remains of the Officers Social Club that was here on the island for officers and their families up until when the prison closed in 1963. There was a stage, there was actually a bowling alley in here as well, and all kinds of entertainment for families and officers and their staff. In 1970, the fire that consumed the house up on the hill that we saw earlier also consumed this building as well. And as you can see now, it's a social hall for seagulls and other birds. A small glimpse into the powerhouse that was here on the island. It's actually still in use today. It's been refurbished. You can probably see some power boxes over there on the left wall. But all the original material and equipment is still here today. Here's an exterior shot of the same building. You can see the power running out of this building across those pipes into the main prison area. So Alcatraz is now powered by solar cells. 959 PV panels in total, with battery banks and diesel generators as backup. On the far end of the island here is what remains of the Laundry and Industries building. You can see that it's pretty much all been hollowed out at this point. Most of the windows are gone. Take a look inside here, which is the laundry building itself, and it actually is open. Just to give you some perspective, so here's the whole island. We're up near here at the moment. So in 1969, the Indians of all tribes took over Alcatraz for 19 months, 1969 and 1970. It was in protest against U.S. government policies and the treatment of Native Americans as a whole by the government. And so they remained here for those 19 months. Let's have a little walk through here and have a look. So after 19 months in June of 1971, the remaining Indians were removed from Alcatraz Island, and arguably they lost their final battle to raise awareness against the plight of the Indians and the history of the area. But obviously here we are now almost 60 years later, and it's interesting that there's an entire wing here at the prison dedicated to the events in 1970 and 71, showing just how impactful ultimately it did become. So this concludes the grand tour of Alcatraz Island. Been here for about 3.5, 4 hours now, and have seen everything there is to see. Really can't recommend it enough if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area to make sure you come and check out Alcatraz Island. It's a great piece of history, and they're doing an incredible job at keeping it as close to the real thing as possible, despite the elements. So now I'm going to head back over to San Francisco, going to find something to eat, and go from there. Good morning from San Francisco. It is my last day here before I head to Los Angeles. So I'm going to take it pretty easy today. I've got a long night ahead of me, overnight travel, and then a long day tomorrow before I check in. So just going to do a little bit of a wander today. As you can see behind me, I'm standing in front of the Dragon Gate here, which is the entrance to the old Chinatown in San Francisco. And I thought I'd take a walk up through, and we'll have a look through and see if there's anything worth checking out. So let's head over. Yeah, that's Sasquatch, what do you know? Let's see if we can get some postcards and stuff. Voila, 5 postcards for $1. Also kind of cool tiger pendant for Year of the Tiger 1974. A fine way to end off my time in San Francisco here at Ocean Beach on the coast. Good afternoon and welcome to Ocean Beach here in San Francisco. I am just near the end of Golden Gate Park and decided to come out to the beach and have a look. My last day here in San Francisco, so I thought no better way than to end it off here by the ocean. What a spot. There's like 100 people here and the beach is ginormous. It's amazing. Beautiful day, the water is pretty nice. people locally might find it cold, I suppose, but I think it's great. And yeah, there's a few surfers here today, and not a cloud in the sky, but nice and cool with the breeze, and tough to complain about much of anything today with this. So, San Francisco has been awesome. I was really excited to come here finally and check out the city and some of its sights, and I feel like it was a trip well worth it. I think the highlight for me has to be visiting Alcatraz yesterday. It was an incredible time, so much history. I mean, that place was right up my alley for the things that I like. And I hope that the footage that I captured gives you an idea of what to expect if you ever do come and visit it. Later tonight, I am heading out on a bus from San Francisco down to Santa Barbara, where we then connect with the Pacific Surfliner Amtrak train, which takes us into LA from there. I'll be in LA for 3 days in total, and then from there I'm heading out to the national parks out in the eastern part of the state, which I'm really looking forward to. It's gonna be a great time, I think. Once again, the transportation around the city has been great. I just hopped on a bus to get out here. Had to transfer once and took about an hour, but you know, if you have lots of time and you're not in a hurry, it's a great way to get around the city. For $5 a day, for a day pass, it can't be beat. So, yeah. One of my tips to provide, I guess, that I can say after today worked out really well, was if you come to San Francisco and you need to get some money exchanged, there's you pretty much probably do it anywhere around the city. But there was one place in particular, it was, make sure I get this right, Heng Long Foreign Exchange, which was on Jackson Street in San Francisco, in Chinatown. I went there today. I had some leftover euros from when I was in St. Pierre, Miquelon, and I had some leftover Canadian money from when I was back home. And so I was able to exchange it in like 2 minutes. It was like a $3 flat fee for the whole thing, and I was in and out in no time. So I highly recommend it. If you need to go somewhere and get some money exchanged, that's definitely the place to go. Anyway, I'm just going to take a little walk along the shore here. You can enjoy some of the sights and the sounds of the ocean, and then I think I'm going to go get something to eat. Yeah, I've still got like 5 or 6 hours to kill, so I think that might be part of my plan. And then eventually make my way back down to the hotel where I stayed, and yeah. Speaking of where I stayed, the Amsterdam Hotel turned out to be a great spot. They have private rooms available if you're not so much into the hosteling, shared accommodations. They have that as well, but the private rooms are great. I stayed in room 107 and have zero complaints. It was clean, it was modern looking, it was, yeah, secure, quiet. Great, fantastic, comfortable bed. So if you're looking for a place to stay in the city that won't bust your budget, I would recommend staying there. Staff are really helpful. The only thing I would keep in mind is that when you do come, you'll be given a key card, obviously, to get into your room, and they require a cash deposit for that of $10 for shared accommodations, or $20 if you're in the private rooms, but then you get it back when you turn the key card back in at the end. But it's just good to know that you will need some of that $20 cash when you check in. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, let's go for a walk.
You want to leave this place where we grew up, this old town, just put it all behind. Remember you and I would always find somewhere to hide when we were kids, so we could see and hear the water run. The river's gonna cry when you're gone. gonna cry when you're gone, 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 gone. River's gonna cry when you're gone, 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 gone. River's gonna cry when you're gone, gone.